confidence do you have in the Supreme Court?
I think this is an activist court.
She thinks it's an activist court? Wait until we see the court that she puts in there. Let's go to our friend Josh Hammer. He's the host of the podcast America on Trial with Josh Hammer. Josh, how you doing, brother?
Doing well, Mike. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Can you express how much the AOCs of the country and the Kamalas of the country hate the Supreme Court?
So, look, let me first react to what Kamala Harris is saying here about the would-be activism of the current U.S. Supreme Court. There is a remarkable degree of complete illiteracy when it comes to the notion of judicial activism, judicial restraint, just generally how the judiciary ought to act, how it ought to comport itself in a given case or controversy before its desk. At some point, people start saying it was necessarily ipso facto, by very definition of the fact, it is somehow judicial activism to overturn a statute or to hold that a statute is incompatible with the Constitution or an executive order is incompatible with the Constitution or something like that. That is not judicial activism. That is the judicial duty. That is literally the whole point of the judicial power of which Article 3, Section 1, Clause 1 of the Constitution speaks. What is judicial activism is making up law from the bench. Now, making up law can take the form of either upholding a statute or striking down a statute or some other thing that I'm not thinking of right now. But it is judicial restraint, and judicial humility really is a term that I would probably prefer. Judicial humility is in actually upholding one's oath of office, which is what Marbury versus Madison requires, going back to the John Marshall masterpiece in 1803, which is saying that you have to abide by the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution, not any kind of statute or executive order or whatnot that is lower than that, but is actually in irreconcilable loggerheads in tension with the Constitution. So there was this tremendous confusion over what is judicial activism. If a judge says that a statute is unconstitutional, that is not in and of itself an act of judicial activism. If the statute actually is unconstitutional, that is just the judge doing what the judge has to do. So I wanted to kind of just get that out there. But, to your question, Mike, the left-wing assault on the U.S. Supreme Court has been going on for a number of years now. In fact, it was actually going all the way back to March or April of 2020, before Donald Trump was even out of office. There was this other abortion case down in Louisiana called June Medical Services. It was a law involving the radius with which a clinic has to have admitting privileges to a hospital, something along those lines there. And it was at that point that Chuck Schumer actually went on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court, and he started lecturing the right-of-center justices. He said, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, you won't know what's going to happen to you if you rule the way that we don't prefer on this particular abortion case, June Medical, because as you and I both know, Mike, there is no holy or unholy sacrament, as the case may be, for the modern left other than the abortion sacrament. So this has been going on a long time now. It really, really started expediting, at least for me, in the aftermath of the leak of the Dobbs abortion opinion in May of 2022. That is when you had senators, congressmen egging on these protesters who were yelling and shouting in clear defiance of black letter U.S. criminal law on this topic outside of the justice homes, trying to get them to change their votes. You had the left-wing nut job, whose name I'm forgetting, fly from California to suburban Maryland to try to go assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. Dude had a firearm. He had a rope to try to, God forbid, lock up this and probably execute him execution style. Thank God police caught him at the last minute. This is a full-on, not just substantive assault on the Supreme Court, very much the echoes of 1937 FDR court packing. This is something even more vicious. I mean, this is coming from a deep personal level at this point. The Chuck Schumer and the Kavanaugh assassination examples, I think, are pretty clear indicators here. They hate these people, and they've always hated Clarence Thomas, going back to his judicial confirmation hearing way back in 1991 with Anita Hill, with Joe Biden, by the way, leading that charge from his Senate Judiciary Committee perch all those many years ago there. So they have hated the conservative elements of the U.S. Supreme Court for quite literally decades, going back at least as far as Bob Bork in 1987. But the difference that in recent years is taking on a seriously dark and in many ways vicious undertone, I fear.
Very good. The I've never seen anything like the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. That to me is the pinnacle of freak out in my political life, was watching that. It was unbelievable. Every day was crazy, unhinged, lunatic attacks. Like, who was it? The guy who used to be the Florida president, University of Florida president, Ben Sass. Ben Sass was in the elevator there. Like these activists were like in the elevator with them. It was like crazy. They hate these people. But you're right. It's like this deep obsession, hatred that they have. On to the policy, if I may. We just talked with Professor Jacobson from Cornell. And I asked him, which of the reforms do you find most concerning? And he said it was the idea of term limits. And he spoke very eloquently about that. Is there another one of the reforms that Kamala Harris wants to impose that concerns you?
Well, I think that term limits probably are the most serious, egregious of the current floated reforms here. I mean, it's really court packing in any other name. I mean, it's kind of a watered down Diet Coke version of court packing, if you will. Look, the Constitution is extraordinarily clear on this. I mean, the Article 3 text says that federal judges on both the U.S. Supreme Court and any other lower courts that Congress may statutorily create, federal judges may sit, quote, during good behavior. And the phrase good behavior has been unanimously interpreted by every constitutional scholar, every constitutional lawyer, practitioner, judge, academic, you name it. Literally across the entire political, ideological spectrum, everyone agrees that during good behavior necessarily means life tenure. How do I know? Because they basically just say it in the Federalist Papers. It's really not a particularly hidden ball or anything. Hamilton, Madison, they're all extraordinarily clear about why they are giving life tenure to the justices. They want to shield them. They want to hide them from being directly accountable to the whims and caprices of the people, the hot passions of the people. It's one of the many counter-majoritarian checks that are woven into our constitutional fabric. Now, people may or may not agree with that on a policy matter. There are many states, including my state of Florida and my former state of Texas, that actually have fairly partisan elections. You might actually agree with that in theory. But the thing is, if you want to change that, you have to change the Constitution, because the text is very clear. You can't just pretend that the text does not say what it clearly says and then give this kind of, like ridiculous, like campaign stump speech that you're going to do it. But, ultimately, Mike, what's going on here with this current iteration of the latest war on the U.S. Supreme Court, none of this is going to happen. I mean, none of it is going to happen right now. It is a pure 2024 presidential campaign gimmick by Joe Biden back then and now Kamala Harris today. They're just trying to gin up their left-wing base. That is the entire point of this broader information operation against the Supreme Court. That is the entire point of the now 2 years in a row of ProPublica, so-called investigative journalism that is trying to suss out anything that it can glom onto to try to point that Clarence Thomas and various conservative donors, Harlan Crow, have something in common there. None of this is about an actual conflict of interest. It is exclusively about the fact that they don't like the fact that there is one major institution in America that they do not single-handedly control. There is one institution, it's not even a right-wing court, but it is a center-right court for sure. I will happily acknowledge that. And they cannot get over the fact that there is one major institution that the wokerati do not exclusively control, and whether or not it is these so-called reforms which have no chance of passing, or whether or not it is the Clarence Thomas, Harlan Crow, ProPublica stuff. There was something in Political last year about how Neil Gorsuch allegedly profited too much from some real estate transaction in an LLC. It's garbage. It is all garbage. It is literally just coming from a place of utter jealousy that there is one major institution that they don't have their dirty talons all over.
And that is I totally agree with that. And that is the main objective of this special, is to put this court back in. I want it to backfire on them, right? If they're trying to use this to gin up their base, I want to use this to gin up our base and have another 2016 where we keep Hillary Clinton from nominating justices. I want to keep Kamala from nominating justices and make sure that none of these things that you're speaking of ever do get anywhere close to the light of day in any way. We only got about 30 seconds, but I remember hearing this, I don't know if this is true, but that Obama did not do a good job of nominating lower or appointing lower court justices. And then Trump came in and just filled this huge backlog. Is that true? / did Trump do a good job in naming judges from your opinion?
Well, Obama was more successful in some jurisdictions than others. So Obama took the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, for instance, which oversees Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and the Carolinas. He took the Fourth Circuit into the left's hands for a generation. I mean, to this day, the right is still playing catch up in the Fourth Circuit. But yeah, I mean, he left some wiggle room for Trump to take serious advantage in various other circuits. So the 11th Circuit, for instance, is now firmly right of center, whereas it wasn't. Even the Ninth Circuit, the infamously liberal Ninth Circuit out on the West Coast in California and whatnot, it's still center left, but it's much more in the middle now than it was when Obama left office. So it just depends. On the latter question, yeah, Trump did an exceptional job when it came to lower court judicial nominees. I mean, almost unanimously. I mean, there are a few picks who were excellent than others, if I'm really splitting hairs, and I can name names if we really want to. But, I clerked on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit for Judge James C. Ho, who's a Trump nominee. I was actually one of Judge Ho's first 4 law clerks. I mean, I saw the Fifth Circuit be transformed before my very eyes during my year clerking on that court. There are any number of other circuits that have been utterly transformed by Trump's picks. This is a crucial issue. We unfortunately live in a day and age of judicial supremacy where the courts really are ultimately the final arbiters of what is and is not correct in this country. That is not the way it was supposed to be. That's a rant for another day. But that unfortunately is the system that we currently live in. And accepting the playing field as it currently is, fighting on the current terrain that for better or for worse we have been given, it is our imperative to make sure we have as many sound constitutionalist conservative justices on all the lower courts as possible, obviously also including the U.S. Supreme Court itself.
Another reason to vote accordingly. Josh Hammer, America on Trial. That's the podcast. Look forward to anywhere you listen to podcasts. Josh, great to talk to you, brother.